Audio recording for this meeting has begun.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, USDA RD Section 504 Repair and Rehabilitation Loans and Grants Program, Overview and Updates. My name is Shantaria Charleston, and I will be your host for today's call. If you've not already done so, please ensure that you have access to both the audio and video portion of the webinar. To access the PowerPoint for today's call, please follow the link on your meeting confirmation email. All participants are in listen-only mode, which means your line is muted. However, we are very interested in your questions and feedback, so to submit a question during today's webinar, please use the Q&A box that will appear on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Again, today's webinar is being recorded. Both the audio and presentation will be available on HAC's website, www.ruralhome.org, shortly following the webinar. And so there are quite a few people that were with us last week for the 502 webinar. Welcome back, and also welcome to those of you who are new joining us for today's webinar. Just a little bit of information for those of you that are not familiar with the Housing Assistance Council. HAC is a national nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. that assists local organizations with building affordable homes in rural America. With a mission to improve housing conditions for the rural poor, HAC places a special emphasis on striving to serve the poorest of the poor in the most rural places. HAC emphasizes local solutions, empowerment of the poor, reduced dependence, and self-help strategies. HAC assists with the development of both single and multifamily homes and promotes homeownership for working low-income rural families through a self-help sweat equity construction method. So if you're interested in learning more information about HAC's service or products, HAC may have an office near you. The HAC addresses as well as the contact information is currently being displayed on your screen. It will also be provided shortly following the webinar as part of the materials for today. Also, please mark your calendar to join us for HAC's upcoming training events. They are being displayed on your screen. We have a webinar that's coming up next week, April 13th at 2 p.m. It's part 3 of the Community Reinvestment Act series. We also have a couple place-based events that are taking place. We have a Veteran Symposium that's taking place in Washington, D.C. on May 18th. We also have a Section 502 packaging certification course that's coming up June 28th through 30th in Burlington, Vermont, as well as our HAC 2016 Rural Housing Conference coming up in November in Washington, D.C. So again, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Section 504 Repair and Rehabilitation Loans and Grants Program, Overview and Updates. So at this point, I'd like to move to quickly introduce our speaker for today, Jean Gonzalez. Jean is the Regional Director of HAC Southwest Regional Office in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Jean has been working in rural affordable housing for more than 30 years. Over the course of his career, he's gained expertise in property management, green housing rehabilitation, and affordable housing. Jean's extensive experience includes subdivision development, single-family housing rehabilitation, Section 202 housing, and Sections 514, 516 farm labor projects. Jean also provides training and technical assistance in green building, energy conservation, home rating, and green rehabilitation for single and multifamily projects. And so at this point, I would like to go ahead and turn the webinar over to Jean.
Thank you, Terry. Thanks everybody for joining us again today. And again, today we're just doing a small overview of the 504 program as we get along. First thing let's do is let's go ahead and take a poll. Terry, if you'd like to do that, we can do the poll first and then we'll get started. And the poll is just a little bit to pick your brain, see where you are, or how much do you understand regarding the 504 direct program. Terry?
All right, so currently being displayed on your screen is a poll for today, and we're asking you to complete the phrase, I've used the USDA RD Section 504 Rural Housing Repair and Rehabilitation Loans and Grants Program. The numbers are coming in. Looks like the majority of people are just now hearing about the program and want to learn a little bit more, followed closely, well, not closely, but followed by individuals that know quite a bit about the program. And then it's an even split between the folks that know somewhat, a little bit, but right now looks like the majority of people are here to learn a little bit more about the program.
Okay. All right. Started since we know more or less what the groups are thinking, or what the families or groups are thinking out there. Today, like I said, it's just the 5-0 Direct program. It's just a quick overview. We won't get into a lot of details, but we'll basically cover the overview of the program, both the direct loan and the guarantee program or the grant program. Again, the USDA, these USDA programs are for rural areas. They're also provided as a loan or a grant depending on the applicant's income status, and we'll get more into that as we go. Rural areas, again, we defined rural areas last time as an open country or places with a population of 10,000 or less, and under certain conditions, we can go to towns and cities up to 35,000 population. Again, there's a special handbook that you have to do, and you have to go into special consideration to get these populations or these areas that are at 35,000 population or a special consideration or special exceptions so you can continue to be eligible in that area. One of the exceptions that are in place right now, and we have two of these that are in place, one of them is any rural area that was designated eligible prior to October 1990. Okay, as long as that area continues to be rural in character, has a serious lack of mortgage credit, and has been a population of between 10 and 30,000, 35,000, you're still in special consideration and are still deemed eligible. So again, that was areas, rural areas, designated eligible prior to October 1990. The second exception that we have for these areas, or for these high population areas of 35,000, is any area designated eligible between January 1st, 2000 and December 31st of 2010. So again, you got the two areas or the two dates there. For 10 years, any area that was acceptable for those areas at that time are still eligible till 2020, when the new census come out. So again, this is areas designated between January 1st, 2000 and December 31st, 2010. And just by looking at some of the groups on the list or some of the people on the list, there's a lot of you that fall under these categories. West Texas, San Elizario, you're one of them that fall into these categories as far as being eligible. Again, low income, we have the same definitions pretty much. Rural development usually has the same definition for all. Low income is defined between 50 and 80% of the area median income. Very low income is below 50% of the area median income. Again, you want to really remember these income limits because it's something that we'll be coming back to over and over. Again, these are rural development programs. They're rural programs. So this is the link that you can go to. By going to this link, you can use a link to learn more about USDA home loan programs, determine if a property is located in an eligible rural area. You can determine the income eligibility of an applicant or the household, or just overall how to apply for various rural development loans and programs. So again, this link is where you want to go. Once you go to that link, the link should look something like this. This is the last one we pulled up, and it looks like this. This will be your eligibility link. Again, you can go into multifamily housing, single family, business programs, whatever the program you're looking for, it's usually on the eligibility list. or on this web page, sorry. So again, that's what the web page should look like when you pop it up. Again, this is eligible areas. As you can see, all of the United States is pretty much eligible for USDA rural programs, depending on what state you're in. Texas, you've got a few blue areas in there, but most of the state of Texas is eligible all along the Mexican border. New Mexico is the same way. All of Montana, depending on what state you're in, you can see where the eligible areas are. So the majority of the country is eligible for USDA programs or loans. Again, the Section 504 is a repair program. These are repairs for very low income homeowners to repair, improve, modernize their dwelling, to remove health and safety hazards, or you can convert a unit to ADA or accessible to homeowners or household members with disabilities. Again, this is talking about the overall program. Again, you have to pay attention that this program is for very low income homeowners. And again, we'll be bringing that up because later on we'll get into a different category as very low income. Again, the 504 loan, the loan program or the loan funds can be used for quite a bit of different things. You can use it to improve or modernize your house. You can make the dwelling decent, safe, sanitary, and remove health and safety hazards. With the 504 grant funds, grant funds can only be used for repairs and improvements that will remove health and safety hazards. Again, you can use it to make the unit accessible for household members with disabilities. Again, a hazard is a property condition that jeopardizes the health or safety of the occupants or members of the community, but does not make the unit unfit for habitation. A major hazard is a condition so severe that it makes the property unfit for habitation. So again, depending on what they are, looking at the hazards, you have to determine whether the hazard is going to be a minor hazard or if it's going to be a major hazard when you're looking at these properties. And we'll talk a little bit more about packaging and looking at these properties because it's a little bit different from the 502. Again, a 504 loan can be used for repairing mobile homes or manufactured homes. Again, the owner has to own the property and the site prior to filling out the application and should have occupied and has to occupy the house. Repairs are needed to remove health and safety issues, and the home is on a permanent foundation or will be put on a permanent foundation with Section 504. Anybody that has been in the field and has worked with mobile homes or manufactured housing know that these things are settled a lot. They have a lot of issues, a lot of problems depending on the age of the house, of the mobile home, whether it's been taken care of or not, but these things settle. One of the first things you need to do is you've got to try to level these things off, and by leveling them, you know, you're going to hear a lot of crackling and cracking, and one of the biggest things you're going to have to do is you're going to have to get under there and insulate the belly of those trailers, insulate them, make sure that they're secure, because once you put them on a permanent foundation, one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to have to be crawling underneath that trailer to get at insulation or anything like that. Again, depending on the age, you run into a lot of issues with mobile homes because sometimes you're cramped for space. You're not able to open up walls or doors or bathrooms to make them ADA accessible. So you run into a lot of issues with mobile homes and repairs and the type of things that they need. Sometimes if they're old enough, if they're new enough, you might get away with just doing a little bit of bathroom remodeling and the handicap ramp. But most of the time, like I said, you got to be real careful with mobile homes. Look at the age. You know, are you going to be able to balance them out? Those type of things. Level them. A lot of issues with mobile homes. But just be careful. Again, restrictions with the use of the 504. There's some restrictions like all government programs. With the 504 program, you can't do acquisition and you can't do new construction. You can't pay for off-site improvements. If you have to run sewer lines, anything like that, the 504 isn't going to pay for those type of things. You can't refinance a debt with this money, and you can't purchase and install appliances. Again, this is something that's coming up in the new handbook, and they're proposing that these things kind of be changed and be allowed as an eligible purpose. Again, one of the reasons is sometimes you'll get seniors that are just a little bit too old to be cooking with gas stoves. They leave the stove on, they start fires, they can start themselves on fire. So sometimes it's a good idea to get away from the gas stoves and put electric stoves in for seniors. That's just one of the ideas that's behind these new changes. So again, these are something that you need to just stay in tune with the rural development. In April, they're going to be coming out with various webinars and talk about all the notices and changes that's going to be taking place for rural development programs with their 3550 programs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Again, you can't do site preparation or landscaping, anything like this. But again, these are all basically the restrictions for the use of the program. Eligibility, again, eligible people or eligible home occupants have to be below 50% of the area median income. The average right now going through the country is about 30% of the area median income is what people that are applying and take advantage of the loan and the grant program. All repairs must be done. All repairs and improvements must make the dwelling safe, sanitary, and one of the priorities is that you must remove all health and safety hazards from the unit. The applicant must own and occupy the property and must be eligible for the 504 loan products. Again, remember that it's people below 50% of area median income. Again, this is the link. If you want to see the eligibility for the loans, grants, or any kind of income limits needed for any kind of program, this is the link that you can go to, and it can give you the direct program, the income limits, and so on. Grants are treated a little bit different. Grants are available to homeowners who are 62 years of age or older and cannot repay a Section 504 loan. At least one applicant of the home must be 62 years of age or older. And one thing that is done with everybody that comes in, there's a budget analysis that is done, and this is on form RD form 1944-3. And basically what this does is they take you through the process that has to be to see if you have repayment ability. And basically most elderly applicants will apply for a grant and not a loan, but before one can determine grant eligible, a loan repayment ability must be evaluated. So this is the reason a 504 applicant, and this is where it gets very touchy and very, I call it crazy, but you know, it's a hard thing to understand, and even rural development staff have trouble understanding this. But the reason the 504 applicants, this is the reason they have to use a loan application form, just like if you were buying a new home, you have to use that application. And again, I forget the number of the application, I have it at the end, but you have to do a full application just like if you're applying to purchase a unit. The budget analysis comes in and they figure out how much money you can pay back after all the deductions and formulas, and they'll figure out how much money you can actually pay back. If you're able to pay back $20, $30 a month, that mortgage or note will be written for the amount that you can pay. And I'll explain that in just a little bit later on. But again, there's always a budget analysis that is done. It's on this 1944-3. It's the full application or a loan application that has to be filled out with all the documentation. It gets very, very complicated in this area right now. But again, it's something that will be done to everybody that comes in. This will determine whether you're eligible for a grant, a loan, or a combination of both. So again, loans are up to $20,000 and grants are up to $7,500 are available. Again, any loan over $7,500 is set up for a 20-year mortgage at 1%. If the applicant is able to pay more than this, the loan is shortened for the term that it can be paid off. So again, if the family, for an example, an applicant's repayment ability, the calculator indicates that he's able to pay the loan off in 10 years, then the loan will be written for a 10-year term rather than the maximum 20-year term. So again, depending what you can pay, that's the amount of loan that you can get and how long it'll take you to pay it. It's complicated, but again, a lot of this is done by RD staff. So, anything related to grant funds, remember if it's grant funds, all those funds have to be used for the removal of health and safety hazards. So basically, anytime you get grant funds, it's going to just be health and safety issues that are going to be taken care of. Loans and grants can be combined up to $27,500. Again, this is a $20,000 loan with a $7,500 grant. Depending on what your payback ability is, this is how it'll all be worked out. Again, a loan grant combination is made if the applicant can pay for part of that cost. And loans made in combination with grants must be amortized for the full 20 years and while you're minimizing the grant amount. Okay, so this is an example, just as an example. Let's say a loan payment, 1% for 20 years equals $4.60 per month for every $1,000 of loan that you have out there. So if you have, let's say for an example, you have a $5,000 loan, you have a payment of $4.60 for every $1,000 times 5, your monthly payment is $23 a month. So these loans are very beneficial to the government because they can underwrite these things down to where the family, they kind of work into them backwards. So if the family is eligible to pay $25, you're automatically eligible to probably qualify for a $5,000 loan. Let's say you needed work up to $8,000. You can afford to pay for a $5,000 loan of that, $8,000, $3,000 or the difference of that would be made into a grant. So you would have a $5,000 loan with a $3,000 grant up to the $8,000 that you would need. Hopefully that kind of clears that up. But again, depending on what you can afford to pay, that's how much loan you'll get, and then the difference that you need would be a grant. Again, so this will get back into it again. So the sum of the outstanding balance of all Section 504 loans can never be more than $20,000. So the maximum you're ever going to get is $20,000 off of these loans, 504 loans. Again, the lifetime grant assistance is $7,500. The reason they call these the lifetime grants, because you can only get them once in your lifetime. So if you come in and you get a lifetime grant for $7,500 for you and that property, that's all that property is ever going to get, or that homeowner is ever going to get. So again, so you're eligible up to $27,500 with both loan and grant. Then, this is what I was talking about, the maximum based on eligible costs. So let's say an applicant comes in, they figure out they need a $5,000. These are $5,000 that they need for eligible repairs or to make the maximum loan amount grant allowable, which is $5,000. So all you're going to get is the $5,000 that you need to make the needed repairs on your property. You're not going to get $20,000 every time. You're only going to get the minimum base for eligible costs or eligible repairs that you're going to need to make on your property. So again, you have to, when you're, well, let me see this price. Yeah, I'll talk about it here. So what happens with these loans, and it's very confusing and it's very hard, is because there is no packaging fee, there is no packagers to do this. Most of the time what happens is an elderly will come in, they'll ask rural development. Rural development will not package the application. They won't get the stuff together, but they will provide technical assistance to whoever's doing that. Most of the time who's going to package these applications, it's going to be a relative, a daughter, a son, somebody that's going to be helping the elderly family to put in these applications. Sometimes it's a nonprofit organization who might be doing, maybe they're doing rehab and they need a little bit of more money, so they're going to help this family or this homeowner apply for a little bit more money through the 504 program. The problem they run into is that the homeowner is expected to do the work write-up. They're expected to get the cost estimates. They're expected to do all this stuff and submit this stuff to rural development. So we all know that's going to gets very complicated. It's very hard, very confusing for somebody that's 62 years of age or older, might be disabled, and for them to do all this, to go out there and get all the documentation they need, get 3 contractors to come in and bid on the property, everybody bidding on apples and not apples and oranges, because every time you get a contractor to come in and you tell him, I want a new bathroom, I need a new ramp here, everybody is going to see something different. So when these write-ups come into rural development offices, sometimes you get this big variety of a work write-up and a cost estimate that are beyond what is called reasonable. So again, if you're doing these for homeowners, if you don't have a background in cost estimating, scope of work write-ups, anything like that, material write-ups, what is ADA requirements, those type of things, then you get into issues other than, that you're going to get into problems. The homeowner's going to get into problems with the contractor, with USDA, and it can become a real mess. So again, if you're helping seniors package these things, you have to be very careful on how these things are written up, cost estimates, what it is exactly that you want to do. Again, just for the cost estimate alone, who's going to determine that cost and what the need is. So there again, it's a very critical situation. Rural development doesn't pay a packaging fee. There's no way of writing a packaging fee into these. So basically, you're doing them for free or for the homeowner, or like I said, if you're doing already matching rehab programs, this is just another way of maybe getting additional funds to come into that. But again, it's very difficult. The applications are hard, and it's hard work on everybody, RD staff, to the people putting it together, contractors coming in. And if you ever try to get contractors to go out in rural areas, yeah, good luck with that. They want to charge you just to come out and give you a bid. Anyway, so those are some of the things that are bad about the 504 program. But again, if you can get past the underwriting and past the application and work right up cost estimates, then you would be good. Again, property requirements, we talked about these a little bit last week with the 502 program. They're pretty much the same for all rural development programs. The property must be considered modest for the area, no in-ground pools, and must not have an excess value of the area loan limit. If you look at loan limits are usually very high compared to the properties that we're looking at, so that's usually not an issue. Not too many people have in-ground pools, so I think we're good there. But these are the 3 main property requirements that require. Again, standards, repaired properties must remain modest and all the work completed in accordance with local codes and standards. We talked about this last time, but again, we'll talk about it. Local codes and standards, all construction for USDA and HUD right now, the requirements are 2009 ICC, or the International Construction Codes. And then for the energy codes, it's the 2009 ICCE, or the International Construction Energy Codes. Again, there has to be the code. One of the problems you run in rural areas is you don't find inspectors. So sometimes with these, Either rural development is going to be doing inspections, or you may have to hire a private inspector to come in and make sure that things are being done to code and to standards. Again, this is an issue that if it's not written up according to codes and standards, you're going to run into issues because contractors are going to come in and do what's written up. So you always have to put that in your work write-up, cost estimates, that all material and labor will be done according to the 2009 construction codes, just to protect yourself and the homeowners. Water supply, sewage disposal, again, one of the biggest areas that we run into, or I ran into when I was doing rehab in rural areas, is that most of the time you're on a septic system. And I've seen everything from septic tanks, cesspools, made out of tractor tires, railroad ties, you name it. So one of the things you need to really be careful is getting to these sewage systems and make sure that if they do have septic systems, they're up to date and current on those things. Water supply, unless you're doing areas with wells, again, you should pretty be okay with water supply. But again, sewage disposal, sewage systems, anything like that, that's where you get into issues in rural areas. Again, major health and safety issues must be corrected. Anything like this that you come into a house, again, depending on who's doing the work write-up, cost estimates, what is it that you're looking for, you need to make sure that all health and safety issues are corrected. And this is where we talk about mobile homes. You got to be real careful with mobile homes because most of the time there's no way of expanding that bathroom, widening doors or halls. So again, just be careful. Again, we talk about not all existing hazards have to be removed, but as long as the property doesn't continue to have major health and safety hazards after the work has been done. Again, only the items that you touch have to be brought up to code. Some of the other items that you see, if they're not a major hazard, and you just basically just leave them alone. Again, so a security for a 504 greater than $7,500, it will have to be secured with a mortgage on the property. These are at 1%, 20 years, depending on what the family can pay. The 504 grant, there's no security required, but there is a Form 3550-24. This is a grant agreement. This states basically that any funds are subject to recapture and will be paid in full if the house that the 504 money was used on is sold within 3 years. So again, depending on how much of this is loan and how much is grant, and that all depends on the financial analysis that is done at the beginning of the whole intake. Again, once the application comes in, rural development usually takes 30 to 60 days of receiving it. Again, they're going to review all the documentation, all the bids. They may even have to take a ride out to the house, look at the unit, make sure that what they're considering hazardous and work that needs to be done, rural development staff agrees with that and goes on from there. So again, these can be time consuming, but in the long term, it would help whether the family is going to receive a grant or loan or whether it's going to be a combination of both. Again, approvals are always contingent upon availability of funding. Funding, we talked about, I don't know if we talked about it, but funding usually comes out every year. It's pulled again like in July and August. After that, any kind of applications that are in will be on the first come, first served basis until funding comes around again. So again, usually for the full year until July, they should be taking applications. These are just maps that you can see. These are talking about the rehabilitation loans, the number and the dollars obligated, depending on what state you're in. Texas had 144 loans that were obligated, 17 New Mexico, and you can see some of these areas, just 2 loans, 5 loans, And I think this reflects the process or the problem or the issues of how hard it is to get a 504 in the system approved, because it's just too hard for seniors to do it, and unless you got somebody that's going to really take the time to work with them, look at the cost estimates and work write-ups and how you can do all that stuff, I think this would probably improve. You know, we've talked to RD in the past, asking them maybe a packaging fee, maybe workshops, town hall meetings to do some of these things. But again, you know, we haven't. So, you know, you can tell just by looking at this that there should be a lot more loans out there that people could afford in the rural areas that could afford and use the program. So again, these are loans. Here are your grants. So again, your grants are a little bit higher. Just goes to show the income limits are lower. Texas, 284 grants. Tennessee, all this area down in here, they all have about the same 191, 200. But you can see in some of these areas, you got a lot more grants than you do loans, so they're serving a lower income population in order to get these grants. Again, the chapter that handles this is Chapter 12, and it's in Handbook 1 of the 3550. This is Section 504, Loans and Grants. I'm not going to get into the handbooks again. These handbooks are going to be updated now in April by USDA. They'll be doing webinars probably all the month of April, and they'll be talking about all the new announcements and the numbered letters and all the corrections and updates to all these handbooks, both the 3550, number 1 and number 2. The 3550 handbook 1, this basically covers all the tasks undertaken by the field offices and what they do, what their process is, how do they do a 502, how do they do a 504, those type of things. And then the 35 or the handbook 2 explains what the agency's centralized servicing center does. And this is in Kansas City, Missouri, I think, and they handle all the loans. This is where they do all the servicing, those type of things. But most of the conversions and most of the announcements that they'll be talking about in April is going to cover with the handbook 3550, and it's all the process that they're doing out in the field. Again, this is just information. If you want to find your local RD office in whatever state you're in, you can go to this website. It's www.rdusda.gov, and that'll bring you up the website for the offices. If you want to do a locator, the same thing, the second link there. You can always call your phone book or get into your phone book and look at all that information. The USDA e-forms, any form that you need, if you go to this link here, this first one, that'll give you any form that you need, and it's e-forms that you can print and download. But I was talking about the Uniform Residential Loan Application. This is it. It's called the RD form, RD 410-4. So when I was talking about how the families or the applicants have to fill out the Uniform Residential Loan Application, this is the application that they have to fill out. Again, it's something new. It's not new, but it's hard to understand. You know, they're going to ask you, the first thing they're going to ask you, or you're going to be asking RD staff, or RD staff is going to be asked is, why do I have to do this whole uniform residential application? I just want a simple $7,500 grant, you know. But again, remember, we need to figure out what the family can pay back, and we have to do that financial analysis in order to determine whether they're going to receive a grant or a loan. So this is the first process. This is where you look at it. It's a very complicated form for probably a 62-year-old or older, but again, somebody's going to have to help them. And then the RD 3550-1, release of authorization. This is another form that you're going to have it signed. You're going to have to make sure that families understand that this release of authorization is for information regarding income. And for more additional information, you can always contact the national office in Washington, D.C., and this is their phone number, address. And I think that's it for me. Again, I like the 504 program, but the issues is that packaging, the work write-ups, the cost estimation, getting those 3 bids, put them together, kind of get the bids so they all read the same, and you're comparing apples to apples. Those I think are some of the harder issues for groups and for rural development. Before I got on the call, I called rural development office, a couple of them, and I asked them to explain the 504 process, and it was all, the family has to gather that information. They have to bring it into us, and then we process it. We don't go out to the field. We won't process it. We won't fill out the application, but their job is to review it and make sure it works out. So I think that's it. I'm willing to take a few questions. I'm not a professional on the 504, but I can take a few and possibly answer them if you'd like.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Gene. We do have a few questions that have come in. Our first question came in from Sandy out in Illinois, and she wants to know, is certification required for packagers for 504 loans?
No, and that's the thing. There really is no packaging fee, so there is no packaging certification. The 502 is the only one right now that you need certification. Like I said, the 504 is a little difficult to package those. You're not going to make a profit. You're either going to be doing those for free, or you might be able to use it as matching funds for another rehab program you may have in-house. But no, there is no certification.
All right, great. We're going to move on to the next question that comes in, that has come in from Julie out at CASA of Oregon. And she says, it sounds as if Section 504 loan and grant funds cannot be used in cooperatives where the land is collectively owned by the homeowner. Do they not individually own their sites? They do not individually own their sites. Is there a waiver or consideration for cooperatives?
Yeah, that's something that you would have to take up with rural development, but most of the time, if it's owned by more than one homeowner or more than one family, they're going to take into consideration all the income and who lives there. And yeah, it's something you'd have to bring up with RD.
All right, great. We're going to move on to our next question from Tony out at PD Affordable Housing. He wants to know, can the work write-up inspections be paid out of the grant?
That I'm not sure. I would say maybe, but more than likely no. It's not like the 502 where if the family's eligible to take on the additional costs and put it in that loan, they might be able to, but I've never heard of that being done with RD. I mean with the 504, but I mean that's something that we can bring up to RD National or the states. It's a good idea though.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from Deborah out at Assist Agency. And this question, Jean, you might have answered during the presentation, but I'm going to give it to you anyways. It says, if the applicant is in desperate need of repairs but does not qualify for loan repayment, i.e. on their Social Security income, could they be awarded grant-only funding?
Yes. Yes, it depends. Like I said, that final financial analysis is only to see if they're able to pay anything back. If they're not able to pay anything back, then it would be a grant.
Okay. Another question from Tony. How does LeadBased Paint come into play with pre-1978 504 projects?
Ooh, you're in trouble. Most of the time what happens is if you have lead-based paint in areas, most of the time what's going to happen is you're going to have to contact your local state PJ, and they usually have money set aside for lead-based abatement only. So you would have to bring in different kinds of money, because once you get into lead-based paint abatement, you're not going to be able to afford to do any kind of abatement or any kind of work on that house, because the $7,500 or the $2,755 isn't going to be able to cover the abatement costs for anything like that. Now, if it's a mobile home, it'd probably be best just to ditch the mobile home and put up a new one. If it's an existing house, again, you'd have to go in there and do a lead-based abatement, but you probably have to get in additional monies, either EPA, Department of Transportation, HUD, the state PJ, home funds. These groups usually have money set aside for lead-based abatement, so you would contact them, do the abatement, and then you would come in and do the work under the 504. That's about the only process, the only way. The other way is that's a unit that you would have to basically walk away from.
All right, and Mr. Bethia, Jean's contact information is provided as part of the materials for the webinar, so maybe you and Jean would have an opportunity to speak offline.
Yeah, you can call me anytime. I'm good.
All right, so the next question, really quick one, can closing costs be paid out of grant funds?
Well, you shouldn't have any closing costs because you're just doing the loan. You're doing a mortgage, so there shouldn't be any closing costs or down payment assistance or anything like that.
Thank you. Deborah has an additional question. How does credit score enter into loan qualification for seniors?
It won't because you're doing the financial analysis. Again, they're not looking at credit scores. They're going to be looking at that financial analysis as whether that senior can pay back or not. If he can pay back, fine. If he can't, then it's going to have to be a grant. But remember, a grant is only for hazardous items. It's not going to be for kind of beauty, remodeling the house or anything like that. It's going to be strictly for hazards.
All right, thank you. Laura from SAW out in Virginia, Habitat for Humanity, wants to know, why are these loans not offered to younger families?
Yeah, that I don't know. I think there's other programs that are available. But these are strictly for 50% or lower, and elderly or disabled.
Okay, thank you. Got a question from Housing Assistance Corporation out in North Carolina. Wants to know if the agency that helps the applicant prepare the application is also a general contractor. Is that a problem if the agency is the lowest cost? Can that agency do the work and get paid?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. You might have to just do a disclaimer, in the beginning or something saying, we're going to also bid. But yeah, I mean, I've seen that done in the past without an issue. Most of the time, groups that are doing that, you might not even get another bidder that comes in. So it depends, But yeah, I don't think it would be a conflict of interest. I would just maybe disclose it in the beginning that you're doing the work write-up, but you'll also be bidding. Shouldn't be an issue.
Great, and looks like our last question has come in from Patricia up in New York, and she wants to know, you have to do abatement even if they are only receiving $7,500. The federal amount is if it's federal funds of more than $25,000 for abatement. Otherwise, would it be lead-safe activities?
Well, yeah, I don't understand the question, but anytime you're going to run into lead-based or you run into lead-based paint, it opens up a whole new can of worms. So depending on what how bad the lead-based base is, whether if it can just be covered, maybe painted over, but if you have to do a full-blown abatement, air testing, that type of stuff, 6 mil plastic, air testing, sanding, all that kind of stuff, then you get into a whole different thing. But even with abatement, even if it's any little bit, even under $5,000, if you get into lead, you just can't ignore it. You can't ignore it. You have to bring it up. You have to take care of it one way or another.
All right. Couple more questions that just popped up, Jean. And the first is, so age does not come into play if your income is below 50%?
Right. Only if you want a grant. If you want a 504 loan, you can be 62 or younger. If you want a grant, you have to be 62 years of age or older. But let's say you're 60, you're disabled, handicapped, you can come in for a 504, but you can't get a grant. It would only be a loan.
Okay. We've got a question from Dorothy. She wants to know, can window units be done, or window AC units be done with 504 funds?
If it's an emergency or if it's a hazard that that lady or that person doesn't have air conditioning, yes.
All right. A question from Charlotte out in Thomasville, Georgia. Does the owner need to have clear title, and what about other liens and other heirs that are not living in the home?
Well, that's where you would get into a problem because you would have to have the other heirs give permission with an understanding that the unit is going to be tied up, and if within 3 years, if it's sold, that money has to be paid back. But most of the time what happens is the homeowner would get anybody else that is part owner to do a waiver or do a power of deed or something until the person dies or something like that to live in the house. There's different ways of doing that depending on the area you're in and what the situation is, you know, what you would have to do with rural development to get that cleared.
All right, so that looks like all the questions that have come in for today. If there are other questions that you think of after the webinar ends, please be aware that Jean's information will be provided as part of the materials for today's webinar. Also, just a quick reminder before we wrap up, again, the recording and all materials will be available on HAC's website, www.ruralhome.org. Also, we did have a question come in with regard to some of the upcoming training events. You can actually find all of our upcoming training events as well as registration information on HAC's website under upcoming events. After the webinar, please also be on the lookout for an email containing a link to your certificate of participation as well as a link to the webinar survey. That is the way that you let HAC know how we are going about or how effective we are at delivering the most appropriate trainings and information for your activities. So with that said, I would like to again thank Gene for the wealth of information that he's provided during today's webinar, and I'd also like to thank each of you for being with us for the last hour and wish you a very good rest of your afternoon. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.